It's
Yeah.
completely crazy that because I spent years criticizing this man, that he can accuse me of a high crime and investigate me. So no, we're not going to sit quiet. We're going to talk about how ridiculous this is, but also that it's happening to so many other people. And that's my concern, is it's not just a handful of elites. People might say, who cares about John Bolton? Who cares about Miles Taylor or Jim Comey? But it's not about us.
Miles Taylor, I am so happy to be talking to you. Feels like it's been a minute. How are you doing?
It's been a minute. Some things have happened in life since we last caught up, but it's wonderful to see you. I'm doing all right. I'm hanging in there.
You continue to have a distinctive and somewhat stressful existence, I imagine. uh,
So some might say I'm just a glutton for the punishment. They're like, this guy, if he would just shut up, things might be easier for him.
and yet, one's conscience can't allow it, huh?
Yeah, it's not great for the pocketbook, but it makes both the pocketbook and the conscience lighter, I guess,
Well
is a way to
said.
put it.
Well,
But yeah, and look, joking aside, it was the past few months have been a real conversation in my little household here about whether we spend the next few years actively speaking out against what we are seeing in our democracy. And it cost us a lot the first go around, and we had just kind of started to get back up on our feet. I built a small business, all of that. And after Trump announced an investigation against me a few months ago, we had to face that question, kind of try to hope it blows over, or do we fight it, and do we fight him? And we made the latter decision, even if, again, it does end up making our pocketbooks a lot lighter.
well, let me ask you about that. I assume you're in a client-facing business. Does it cause you to lose clients?
Yeah, I mean, it caused me to lose my business partners. I founded a consulting firm in Washington, D.C. called Washington Office. It was so named because it was the fractional DC office for emerging technology companies. And so we represented quantum computing and space companies and robotics and a whole range of really interesting companies, and helping them figure out how to engage in Washington, D.C., in the national security community. And after Trump's executive order in April, accusing me of treason, my business partners forced the dissolution of the company. They no longer wanted to be in business together because they too were scared about being in Trump's crosshairs. And so that was a hard thing to lose a couple of friends, but an even harder thing for our family to say, okay, well, there goes our financial safety net.
Mm. I'm sorry to hear that. I wanna ask you, just for folks who aren't aware, so as you alluded to, Trump has called you a traitor. He had your clearance revoked, and he has issued, I think it was a presidential order to have you investigated. Since that time, we have seen the FBI raid John Bolton's house to remove papers, electronics, etc. And he also has been called a traitor. So I'm curious to first understand, what is it that you're being investigated for, if you know? Where does that process stand right now?
It's a great question. I don't know the answer, and I say this not even the slightest bit facetiously. I'm not sure Trump's investigators know what they're investigating me for either. I mean, at the time when he issued the order, the Wall Street Journal called it an obvious fishing expedition. So they seem to be trying to find a thing that they can hold against me, try to find a crime. This is apparently what happened to Lisa Cook as well. She's on the Federal Reserve Board. Donald Trump has decided he wants to clean house at the Federal Reserve Board. And then, surprise, there's these allegations that she committed mortgage fraud. And these documents got dredged up from years ago. I'm sure that was not a coincidence. I mean, anyone who thinks it was a coincidence is an idiot. I mean, it popped up because they wanted to go find a crime she committed. The only reason I think it's taken a while is I'm pretty sure I haven't committed crimes. So they're probably having a hard time finding something to justify such an outlandish accusation like treason. Even if I had committed mortgage fraud, which I haven't, I don't have quite that big of a mortgage. That wouldn't really fit this incredible billing Donald Trump has said of this man has committed treason, a crime punishable by death. Well, shoot, if Miles committed mortgage fraud, that's not going to live up to it. So, look, I think his investigators are having a hard time. Folks would say, Jessica, man, if you're under, an investigation by the president of the United States, you probably should just sit back and sit quiet.
Yeah.
And as I alluded to earlier, we've decided not to because we think this is completely crazy. It's
Yeah.
completely crazy that because I spent years criticizing this man, that he can accuse me of a high crime and investigate me. So no, we're not going to sit quiet. We're going to talk about how ridiculous this is, but also that it's happening to so many other people. And that's my concern. Is it's not just a handful of elites. People might say, "Who cares about John Bolton? Who cares about Miles Taylor or Jim Comey?" But it's not about us. This is now happening to thousands, tens of thousands of people who are in the president's crosshairs in some way, shape, or form.
That he's launched investigations into them?
Well, I'm characterizing this more broadly as Trump's revenge
Right.
campaign. So, yes, he's launched investigations into a lot of people, but he's also decimating government agencies that have spoken the
Right.
truth, revoking people's
Reputations.
security
Yeah.
clearances. Sure, whole industries and sectors that are the targets of his
I'm
revenge.
curious, are any people in power coming to your defense, or are you in this on your own?
Um, there have been really, really, really wonderful people in elected office, largely as you would expect on the Democratic side of the aisle. I'm not a Democrat. I mean, I'm also no longer a member of the Republican Party. I remain a conservative, but I've had a lot of support from Democrats, both elected and former, a lot of former Republicans. There's been crickets on the Republican side of the aisle, though, from elected leaders.
Not even privately messaging you saying, "Hey, I'm with you. I just can't do anything in public." It's just quiet.
Most of those people are gone now. I mean, if you'd asked me that question a couple of years ago, if this had happened a few years ago, there would be dozens and dozens of them. I was talking to a lot of people in the Senate, in the House, that were still in the first Trump administration that were Republicans, and there were a lot of would-be dissenters in the GOP. I would say most of them have been purged from the party.
Yeah. I'll remind people who don't remember, you wrote an op-ed while you worked as Chief of Staff of the Department of Homeland Security in Trump's first term, in the New York Times, signed by Anonymous. You are that famous anonymous person, no longer anonymous. And once you left the administration, you became a very outspoken critic of the ways you saw Trump violating the rule of law, and abusing power, essentially. You were on News Not Noise so many times, and I really am grateful for the amount of visibility you gave these issues for our audience. I'm curious, given that you're a known critic of the administration, what do you think is the real goal of Trump's targeting of you? And do you think it ends here, or does it extend to journalists, activists, other critics?
I would be speculating about their goal were it not for the fact that right after the president signed this order in the Oval Office and on the same day signed a similar order against my former colleague, Chris Krebs, whose only crime was declaring that the 2020 election was secure, contrary to Donald Trump's position. And Chris was fired by tweet and now is subsequently also under investigation. Um, Immediately after that, the president, a number of his senior aides spoke to news outlets anonymously, ironically, saying that the reason they'd issued these orders against me and Chris Krebs was to send a message. That was their quote. I mean, they said the quiet part out loud, that it was intended to basically intimidate other dissenters. And I think that is their goal, is to try to prevent people, whether they are inside the administration or more broadly inside the Republican Party, from speaking out against Donald Trump, to show them we can take a wrecking ball to your life. And I would like to come on here, Jessica, and pretend, it will have no impact. They can't hurt you. But no, it works. I mean, blacklisting people works. It destroys their lives. I mean, there hasn't just been a financial toll for us. There's been a huge security toll. I mean, I won't say what it was, but just an hour ago, I was meeting with a contractor about making some very serious enhancements to our property on top of the other security enhancements we already have in place, because we have had some very specific threats from spooky people. And so it affects your life. They know that. They know that the intimidation works. And But I don't think it stops with, the raid at John Bolton's house or executive orders against me and Chris Krebs and other folks. I think they are going to continue because they want all sorts of different personas to fear this possibility. And you mentioned journalists. I think that's one of the cohorts that they're going to go after next. Actually, let me caveat that. I think at present, I suspect that the Trump Justice Department is already searching through journalists' records, and many of them are unaware of it. Barbara Starr, who I know you used to work with
Yeah.
at CNN, she has spoken publicly about when she was previously investigated, and there were the government had gotten warrants essentially to go through her phone and documents, essentially to find her sources on a sensitive news story. And she was, of course, unaware that that was happening at the time. I mean, those were, the government got those under seal. I strongly suspect that is happening right now, that there are a number of journalists who don't know that the government's going through their records. And it's just a matter of time before we see journalists whose apartments and homes are raided in a search for information about who their sources are.
Mm. It's why one of the reasons it's so meaningful that you do continue to speak up and try to model what it's like to not be intimidated. Can we broaden out the discussion to what Trump is doing that in this regard that captures even more of the American people? You've warned about Trump's broad disregard for the rule of law. When you were DHS chief, you saw ICE and other agencies up close. Given the amount of funding that's been poured into ICE, the way they're behaving, do you think that Trump is essentially building a secret police force that answers to him?
Yes. Yeah, he is. And I'll tell you that specifically, Trump had conversations in the first term about wanting his own either police force or military. There were these strange conversations that I was told about in the first Trump administration. I was not in those conversations with the president about him wanting a sort of personal military force, not unlike what Vladimir Putin had in Russia with the Wagner group. This sort of group of uh
Incompetent Wagner group, but okay.
yeah, that's right. I mean, even Putin learned that, wow, that's not a
Right,
good idea. They can turn against you.
right.
But he wanted this group of mercenaries. And there were a number of conversations about that, I was told. And a lot of people were alarmed about that. And those conversations got shut down in the first term. But Trump had this idea of wanting this sort of unaccountable, except to him, force. And I think he would have loved for that to have been ICE in the first term. They didn't get the funding that they wanted, but now ICE is becoming the biggest law enforcement agency in America. It will, for all intents and purposes, report directly to the president. And I do think he wants to expand that and the FBI into what you would call the pocket police. And I had a conversation the other day, someone you and I both know, Frank Figluzzi, who had been an assistant director of the FBI, wonderful
Good
guy.
guy,
Frank
yeah.
ran counterintelligence over there. And Frank's a very measured thinker. And, he doesn't make a lot of hyperbolic statements about the bureau that he used to work at. But Frank used that terminology in describing what the FBI has already become. And I would have expected Frank to say, it could eventually be that way. And he looked at me and he said, no, Miles, it is now the pocket police of the White House. That was
And
scary stuff to hear from
for
him.
people who don't understand, that doesn't mean that they'd only target immigrants, that they could target American citizens and for who knows what.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
don't think for a second that ICE is just about immigrants. And that's actually one of the things that I think is a Trojan horse here that the administration is undertaking. They have vastly expanded the anti-immigrant efforts in this country, but the same tools they are using can and will be used against Americans, domestic political enemies. So ICE, for instance, yeah, immigration is in the name, but within ICE, its most powerful arm is called HSI, Homeland Security Investigations. It's not a deportation unit. It's basically a mini FBI built into ICE. And they have a vast array of ways to investigate American citizens, a whole array of different authorities. And I do believe that they're going to start using ICE to do things far beyond immigration enforcement. And in some ways, they already are. I mean, there are indicators of that. There have been a number of cases like that. And that's really alarming because there's far less oversight even of ICE and HSI than there is the FBI. Not that that's prevented the FBI from getting politicized.
Well, that makes what I'm about to ask you even more chilling, which is ICE has recently gained phone hacking access. They have a software that I think was used in Italy to spy on journalists and activists, and it can get into one's phone. Separately, we know Palantir has an at least $10 billion contract with DoD. Doge has opened up a lot of the nation's data to who knows what sources. Do you see this turning into a techno surveillance state?
I do. I think it's happening. I mean, unfortunately, I tell friends who are in work in foreign governments or are, formerly senior, Western government officials. I tell them, look, if you're coming to the United States, your devices are likely not safe. I say that to fellow American citizens who are traveling into and out of the country because I remember what we were able to do then when I was in government. If there was a target that we wanted to try to go after, a bad
Not
guy who
just
was
at
crossing
the
U.S.
border,
borders.
not just
Well,
in the interior.
not just at the border, yeah, in the interior of the United States as well. But I mean, I think the easy point to get a lot of when they're transiting into and out of the United States is, there are pretty clear exceptions to the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution that allow for advanced searches at the border, even of American citizens. And, they have the ability to take your device and maybe they'll mail it back to you, but you don't know what happened to that device. They're under no obligation to tell you what's happened to that device while it's out of your custody. Things like that are very concerning to me. And I know a lot of people who are normally very trusting of their government who are current and former government officials of both sides of the aisle who now when they're traveling into and out of the United States are taking precautions. A lot of them traveling out of the country with burner devices because they don't want their actual devices seized by the Trump administration and searched. And it's something that I warned about a couple of years ago as I was talking about what a second Trump administration would look like. Is I said they are going to take advantage of what at the time we had called pocket litter searches at the border. That's when you go through at the border, searching through what's in your wallet and your pockets, but also your devices. And that was an area that seemed to me very ripe for abuse. And I
I just
suspect it
wonder,
is being abused.
given Trump's disregard for the law anyway, why would he limit it to the border
I don't think you will. I think that's just the easy button for
to
them,
start? Yeah.
and because, you may not necessarily tip off a subject to the fact that they're under investigation because they know they're gonna encounter security when they go through the border. I mean, certainly you would tip them off if, they stopped you on the street and took your iPhone, but if they did a search at the border, that might be an easy place for them to
Right.
whether it's install malware or to mirror image a device.
So here's my big question. Do you have a theory on what the end game is? And let me explain what I'm asking. Do you see Trump's like the end state they're looking for? Not necessarily Donald Trump, but the Trump administration. Is it a Project 2025 style Christian nationalist, Christo fascist sort of regime? Is it a techno monarchist where tech elites have massive control over parts of our economy and they're effectively the government? Is it a corporate government run, socialist kind of nationalist version of that? I mean, what do you see as the state that the Trump administration's trying to build?
Well, it's a very different answer if Donald Trump is in the picture and if he's not. If he's not in the picture, I think there's varying views within the Republican Party about the direction they want to take the country, and a lot of those are quasi-authoritarian, and a lot of them are not. With Donald Trump in the picture, it is very naked authoritarianism. He wants to consolidate power to advance his own self-interests, whatever those interests are. And I think primarily those interests are financial. It was the best explanation in the first term for why Donald Trump acted the way he did when it came to foreign policy, why he sucked up to dictators, is because he knew those would be people who it would be easier to do deals with when he was outside of government. We, of course, have seen his family cashing in on the vast array of relationships that were developed during the first term and that are continuing to be developed in term. So I do think a lot of it is about money. And at the end of the day, Donald Trump is also going to try to keep any of the political opposition out in any way he can. So, if he had his druthers, Jessica, it would be to end elections in this country, at least for as long as he is around, as he does not want to see the opposition elected.
Do you, though, see an apparatus around him that is pushing for something beyond Trump's personal corruption? So these attacks on scientific research, the effort to privatize so much of the government, the push for example, withdrawing women's rights quietly. All these things that either point to Christo-fascism or a sort of techno-monarchism that are apart from what Trump's doing to enrich himself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that look at the core of it. There is there's something happening under the surface that's much bigger than Donald Trump. And there is a deep populism coursing through the veins of our politics, not just in the United States, but globally. And at the core of part of that populism is a tension between people who want a government that provides more stability and stable services and people who want to separate from the government altogether. And these extreme forces are at war with each other. And I think we're seeing that manifest in American politics. Now, it's kind of an odd position because Republicans that tend towards the more libertarian view of autonomy are in power. And so they're not trying to reduce that power right now. But I think as soon as Donald Trump leave office, Democrats take the White House again, you will see a lot of those forces pull in the direction of autonomy. Words like secession are crazy words. They're scary words that you and I never would have said years ago. I mean, at all. It just would have never crossed our
Yeah.
minds. But I think we are in a window where I was just having a conversation with some folks the other night about this. In the next 10 years, I think it's very credible that there will be popular secessionist movements in the United States. Now, I'm not saying that a state will secede in those 10 years, but I'm saying somewhere in the next 10 years, we will see what looks like a majority of the populace in a state possibly veering towards trying to, engage in secession. That is a statement that goes beyond
Wild.
Donald
I know.
Trump and to the forces in our politics. So, yeah.
I am cheered to hear you say that you think there's a future where Democrats win an election and there is an election where that's possible. So that's one good thing. Quick one. I'd love a short answer on this, which is I'm just confused why the Trump administration is trying to defund FEMA. To me, that
Yeah.
seems like one of those things where his own voters will be hurt by that. What's the possible logic I'm missing here?
Well, in the first case, Trump hated being blamed for natural disasters. In Puerto Rico and other places, he felt like if it went bad, he took the blame. But second, the real story is they don't want to fully get rid of that funding. They want to centralize it in the White House. So Trump announced in June, not too many people paid attention, that he was going to centralize all decision making about federal aid in the office of the president. That hasn't started yet, but you can imagine it's about to begin. He personally wants to decide after a crisis, you get cash and you don't, because it gives him leverage over those states. This is going to happen. Mark my words. This will be a major news story all throughout next disaster season, is Trump deciding if he's going to give money to people or not, depending on if he likes a blue state or a red state.
So that's so insightful. Thank you. And I'll pursue that. Is there the apparatus of FEMA you imagine stays in place, like people on the ground to go to the red states when he wants?
Yeah, I think they're going to, my guess would be they're going to rename it. They're going to put a new coat of paint on it. They're going to install some of his loyalists in there. And they're going to slim down the staff because they don't want this legacy staff that's used to issuing money regardless of what a voter's political affiliation is and helping every American. In order to really politicize an apparatus like that, they got to slim it down. They got to put their own people in. That's what's going to happen next at FEMA.
Lastly, are you hearing any signs of dissent whatsoever within the GOP?
No. I mean, I'm really not. I mean, I'd like to say something more hopeful. It's not going to happen. I think that if there ever was the prospect of a real rebellion in the Republican Party against this sort of populist authoritarian slide, it would have happened before 2020. It started to, but that fledgling resistance ended up being largely Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, and a handful of others, and they've all been summarily pushed out of the Republican Party. I don't see even a sliver of hope that there is any real opposition within the GOP at a national level anymore. And so that means that, it's really up to the Democrats to push back against Donald Trump. And I think we're seeing the governors in the states take on a much bigger role because a lot of these things are becoming regional and local. And that's where a lot of the president's revenge is focused. So, governors are in the hot seat more than they've been in a very long time.
It's true. Well, I'd love to end on a helpful, if not hopeful note. So, would you tell people where they can find you to support you directly if they'd like to? What's your Substack, etc.?
Yeah, look, if people want to follow me on Substack, I'm at treason.substack.com, also treason.io. So named because, if the president of the United States believes that dissent is treasonous, then I will happily count myself a traitor. And so I write there on that Substack. But also, if people want to actively support folks who are the targets of presidential revenge, there's been a legal defense fund, a nonprofit tax-deductible legal defense fund stood up for folks like me called endpresidentialrevenge.org. It's END presidentialrevenge.org. And the only reason we've been able to fight back legally against what happened to us is that amazing organization, Whistleblower Aid, started this fund for folks in circumstances like ours. So immensely grateful for all the people around the country who've helped out with that.
That's great. Miles, thank you so much for your voice. And let's not wait so long to do this again next time.
Amen. Thank you, Jessica. I really appreciate you.
It's great to see you.